Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Welcome to Feedback episode 17 on this 20th of October 2020. That's 10/20/2020. Today we're joined by producer and curator Argeo Ascani and Mark Fell, and we'll be talking about our piece Core Self Oscillation that we worked on with Mark in 2015. It feels like only yesterday, but now it's more than five years ago. So welcome. Thanks for joining us, guys, and excited to begin the conversation. I'll kick it over to Argeo.
Yeah, Russell, thanks for having me. Hello, Mark. Hello, everyone. How's it going?
Hello.
Good. Hello, Argeo. Nice to see you again.
It is lovely to see you again. I haven't seen you in quite a while. And seeing each other, it seems to be a luxury these days. So we should relish it as much as we can. For those of you listening at home, if you've been following along, you probably know a lot about Yarnwire already. And if you do not, you should check out some of the back catalog of feedback episodes, especially episode number 1, which gives sort of a history of the organization, and then all of the conversations with composers who Yarnwire worked with over the past several weeks. But today we're going to work with someone who comes from a little bit of a different background than most of the composers Yarnwire has worked with, and that's electronic music composer and multidisciplinary artist Mark Fell. So Mark, you have a T-shirt that I really like, and the T-shirt says on it, "Unusual electronic music, typically without academic affiliation." Can you talk a little bit about that idea and how it relates to you?
Well, that came about because people used to ask me, what do you do and what kind of genre do you fit into? And it seemed impossible to kind of sum it up in fewer words. So basically it's just a literal description of what I do, which is unusual. I like the idea of calling the music that I make unusual rather than experimental, because it just I think the word experimental for me seems to have a lot of kind of value. It's associated with ideas of like hierarchy and authenticity and stuff, and what constitutes experimental music tends to mean stuff that comes out of academic institutions. So I kind of avoid the word experimental, and I was thinking about what to put in its place, and so unusual seemed like a kind of more honest substitute.
And
so,
the without academic affiliation is interesting to me because it's sort of implying a couple different things at the same time. One is that it is you're not saying that it is not academic. You're just saying it doesn't have that particular affiliation, and it sort of is like existing in maybe a liminal space between, for lack of a better word, entertainment music and academic music, sort of on both places. Does that seem accurate?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the world that I inhabit, there tends to be two crowds, or you could divide us into two crowds. Those that work in academic institutions and have access to fancy studios and stuff and grants, etc., and all the stuff that goes with that about pursuing career and getting the prizes and getting, going from lecturer to senior lecturer to professor or whatever. And then there's the bunch of us that are kind of like outside that, who are independent and I'm kind of proud of being independent, I guess. And I guess my hostility to the academic world, I mean, I've always kind of had a little bit of a kind of relationship with academia, but my relationship has always been a challenging one, I think. I've always found it difficult to fit in that context. And I mean, basically, I think most of the music that comes out of those places is not particularly good music, and yet gets a lot of credit for being world beating and stuff, and blah 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 blah.
Sure.
And I think the really good stuff happens outside academia.
But at the same time, a lot of your music, well, in terms of your solo career, right, your solo performing career as an electronic musician, you perform a lot in academic situations. Like institutions will hire you to, I mean, that's the way that you and I met, sort of was in an academic context. But there's other contexts that you perform in as well, which could also be club contexts or sort of a whole gamut of different situations. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily consider a museum or an art gallery an academic context. And I'm often in those places. But I didn't start in those places. I started in basically like house and techno scenes, and got progressively weirder. And that's when I guess a lot of academic institutions started to take interest in what I was doing. But yeah, what was the question?
Oh no, I was just trying to contextualize like the type of places that you perform, sort of spread across a wide range of different types of places.
I mean, yeah, I kind of end up in all kinds of spaces, and initially because I didn't study music and I didn't go the whole route of like I was never in bands and stuff. I was never like did the whole thing of learning how to perform and what it means to be in front of an audience and all this. I didn't have a kind of gradual route into that. Suddenly it was like, wow, I'm here on a stage in front of a massive audience, and it kind of feels weird. And so initially when I started out doing this kind of work, I didn't really feel comfortable in any context. If it was a gallery, it was like, God, this seems a bit kind of, why aren't people chatting and stuff? And if it was in a club, everything seemed wrong. Like, because I don't make club music, and I don't make the kind of stuff that would typically be heard. It's not kind of easy listening, experimental electronic music. So I kind of, for a long time, felt sort of like I didn't fit anywhere. But I think I've kind of learned to enjoy the best of what those different contexts offer, I guess. So if I am in a gallery or a museum or a quiet listening space, then I'm quite happy to work to that, make a piece of music that sort of makes sense in that context. Whereas, initially it was like, it didn't fit. My music didn't really fit anywhere.
Totally.
That's a nice compliment, Argeo. Thank you, Tom.
And I'm also trying to sort of hone in a little bit on sort of this, how this situation came about, where this, relatively, maybe one of the Yarn Wire members will let me know if I'm speaking out of turn, but this like very academic ensemble sort of intersects with you and your work, and how this commission kind of came about. And Russell, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you guys found out about Mark's work and what interested you in what he was doing.
Well, Argeo, we found out about Mark's work because of you. and here we are. We've come full circle.
Yeah. I actually didn't remember that. As I was saying the question, I remembered, and I was like, I'm too far in to back out. But.
No, well, I mean, it's really nice, when you learn about music from your friends, that's how I've always learned about the music I love. The people that you are friends with recommend things that they've been listening to and are into, and you do the same. And I think we were talking one day, and you were like, you got to check this out. And I'm blanking on the record that it's from, but I remember, I think there were like some geometric shapes on a white background, the YouTube link or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to look like some Kandinsky painting in my brain, which I don't think it is. But you sent that album, and it was awesome. You know, I think I listened through it like 2 or 3 times immediately, just the whole thing, and we sent it around to everyone in the group, and we were like, wow, this is really cool. And I think, you know, at that time we were exploring the idea of, you know, branching out from, I guess, what you framed as academic music, or one could say, you know, contemporary classical music or whatever, and kind of trying to see who else we could work with, because as musicians, I know each of us has done not just notated classical music. You know, we have like pretty rich musical lives outside of that, from improvisation to bands to all sorts of stuff, you know. And we're like, well, can this ensemble handle stretching ourselves, you know? And we had done some similar work, I think, by that point with like Pete Swanson and other people who were, you know, we just love their music, and it's like, well, let's use this thing as a vehicle for collaborating with whoever, you know. And I think that's kind of where it came from. And I think you might have put us in touch, Argeo, via an email. And then that's kind of the beginning of it, if I'm remembering.
Yeah. And I have to say, because when Mark was talking about how he didn't feel like he really fit in anywhere, like he was, you know, not poppy enough for the pop venues or not classical enough for the more academic settings. I actually, in some ways, I think we identify with that as a group. We don't fit neatly into a lot of categories in people's minds. When we try to explain the kind of music we're interested in, all the different things that we do, there isn't always like a neat explanation. And so maybe those sensibilities, somehow we found each other, I like to think.
I'm going to use unusual from now on. I love that.
Yeah, I love it.
But I'll have to put an asterisk.
Yeah.
It is a nice word, you know, it's completely without any sort of pretension. I think.
True. Yeah, experimental
But
gets
I
at
also
like
want to
something.
make a point that I'm not totally down on contemporary classical music. Like, I think to understand my background, I'm from a small working class town in the north of England. My experience of music was basically whatever was on the radio or television. So if you play me some classical music, I will just think of Tom and Jerry or something like that. I won't have, you know, I still to this day won't be able to have any meaningful context other than that. But I was just talking to some friends yesterday, actually, and I think for a long time I was kind of the most narrow-minded person you could ever meet when it came to music. You know, it was like, if it didn't sound like the Human League in 1981, I was not interested. And I think that lasted for probably 15 years. And then I thought, hang on, this is a bit, it's not actually really very good to be like this. And spent a long time trying to learn and kind of work out what other things were out there. And I realized what my problem was. It wasn't that I was narrow-minded, it was just that I was ignorant. You know, and I knew a lot about, even as a kid, I knew quite a lot about electronic music because I was buying it all the time, but I didn't know anything beyond that. So I remember going into the record shop when I was like 15 and thinking, there's this section of classical music and there's all these names on it and I'm really interested. And I'd just buy something at random. And of course it was like awful, because I think 99% of all music is probably awful. And I just hit on the wrong thing. And unfortunately, I didn't hit on the right thing. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's why actually it's really important to give people access to things beyond their immediate sphere of experience, you know. Like, I wish there'd been someone around when I was a 15-year-old kid saying, you should check out Xenakis, you should check out this, etc. And there wasn't. And that basically sort of blinkered me for a long time, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's not that I'm completely down on that world. I'm down on the kind of hierarchical divisions that it often reinforces. I'm not down on the kind of musical differences.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you
Sorry,
say
I just thought I should do that.
No, yeah, it's awesome.
It's awesome. I agree 100%.
Yeah, no, it's funny because I think like all the members of Yarn Wire would agree with me that the the access from the classical music scene into basically any scene that is not mass commercial music, that's not Drake or whatever, is also very intimidating at a time. There's a lot of electronic being made, and like you said, 99+% of it is like not very good, or not very good. It's maybe not necessarily relevant to the situations that we're sort of discussing here, and it feels very intimidating to have a contextualized understanding of contemporary classical music, which is expected from sort of people who go through the academic system. You're supposed to know all these things and have an understanding of jazz and electronic music and folk music and all these things. It just becomes quickly overwhelming. And so it is a place, I think, especially between unusual electronic music and unusual classical music, that fruitful exchange can kind of, come about. And I think that this piece is sort of a result of that. So sort of just harping on this idea just a little bit more, I apologize. So in a traditional classical composer role, there's sort of this idea that there's this figure, he has all these sounds in his head, or she, pardon me, they hear hear the music or sort of have an idea, and then it gets translated from their head onto paper where they write notes that someone will then, interpret and perform. But the way that you make music in general, Mark, not specifically for this piece, but just in general, it sort of has a different little sort of medium in between there. And I wonder if you could talk about sort of the framework that you use to sort of create sound.
Well, that kind of description that you gave about how music is made, or any art, it's a very kind of it's familiar to all of us, like if you ask someone, what do artists do, a lot of the time they'll give that description. Well, they sit down and have these ideas, think about it, and then find a way to express those ideas. So it's this kind of based on inspiration and thought as being the primary origin of artistic activity. And as someone that kind of grew up basically messing around with electronic music equipment, I was always aware that I didn't really have any ideas, and that I just used to kind of mess around and see what came out. And what I think is that actually that is the way that most music and creativity happens, that it's not driven by a thing called inspiration, but it's driven by a thing called curiosity. And I think if you talk, I'm a bit fixated on asking artists, how do you do what you do? Not because I want to get to the truth, but I'm interested in how they describe it. And I don't know if you remember, Argeo, but I was up at Rensselaer Polytechnic at MPAC one time, and I was with a class of students, and we were talking about how we do this. And I asked this question, like, how do you make work? And one guy said, well, I have an idea, then I get all these little boxes, like, like effects units and stuff, connect them together, and then make the idea. And I said, how did the idea get in your head? And he went, I got all these little boxes and connected them together to see what would happen. So clearly, in one sense, the boxes are an active part of how the thing is generated. But when it came to his description of it, that bit was missed out. And I think that kind of absorbed exploration of the environment that we do is part of what happens when we make music. That's not to say you can't sit, I use this piece of software, Max MSP. I've been using it for over 20 years now. And I often think that if you cut my brain open, it would probably look like a Max patch by this point. But the point is that even though a lot of what I do, I think, is about responding to how tools behave, that doesn't mean to say that once you've had that experience, you can't kind of, in an offline sort of manner, sit down and think about what you might do with them, if you see what I mean. So I guess, for example, if your instrument is a violin, at some point you become very familiar with what a violin does, and you can start to imagine what you might do with the violin without even having to touch it. But that doesn't mean to say what you're imagining is not in some way derived from an experience of the violin. if you see what I mean. And I think that's, when I look at how artists do what they do, it seems to me that that's what happens a lot of the time. That there's a kind of dialogue between the materials and the processes and the person. So yeah, that's kind of how I understand what I do.
Totally. And I mean, I am not a composer myself in any way, so there is a little bit about that particular process that isn't intuitive to me. But with your music specifically, some of the ideas, particularly sort of the rhythmic ideas, feel like beyond my capacity to understand. Right? That it's just the rhythms are so complicated and they're so close together and the density is so high and so many things are happening at the same time. And I guess I'm curious, is when you sort of think about making these works, is it a specificity of sort of, you know, a rhythmic identity that is in your head that you then sort of find a way to realize, or is it just sort of more of a general construct that then is sort of realized through like actuating it, sort of like actually sort of like making the sound yourself?
I think it's a lot of different things, you know. Sometimes it is just exploration. It's like I'm making this system in Max MSP and I'm seeing where it's going, and that will suggest things to me, and then I'll actively pursue those, you know. So it's not just this complete free for all of let's just see what happens, you know. Clearly there are like aesthetic judgments going on, and lots of other things at the same time. But really it's, I mean, I wouldn't say it's actually very complicated rhythmically. It's not, it's fast for sure, but there's a kind of flow to it that as a human being you can kind of feel the trajectory of where it's going. I think, you know, it's not this completely random chaotic thing, you know. The rhythmic stuff that you're talking about, the kind of fast rhythmic stuff, I think has kind of has a kind of shape to it that is quite easy to assimilate and has a kind of quite a human energy to it as well. So but yeah, it's not the kind of music that I could ever make if I just, you know, a lot of music is made on these timeline editors where you kind of either record in and edit and draw some notes and etc. It's not the kind of music that I could ever make in that way, because the patterns are literally not things that I've imagined. You know, the patterns are things that have come from the machine, and I thought that's really nice.
And do you consider that to be like a like some people would use the word like an improvisatory element or an intuitive element, like how like that moment of like sort of like something happens and you hear it and you're like, holy shit, that how would you articulate that moment of spark?
You could call it improvise. I mean, it is intuitive. You could call it improvisation, but perhaps improvisation is not the best word for it. Like after I made these works, I call these works microtemporal works. I made those maybe like 7 or 8 years ago, perhaps a bit more. Someone suggested that I should go to India to learn about Indian classical music, and I did. I went to the south of India and spent a long time learning about Carnatic music and made a whole lot of really good friends in that world. And a lot of the conversations we have are about how appropriate is this word improvisation for how meaningful is it to apply to Indian classical music. And a lot of my friends who are from that world say, well, actually it's kind of like a Western word and we don't feel that comfortable with it, but there isn't anything that we can substitute it with. And the closest I've come to understanding that objection is, if you imagine two chess grandmasters playing a game of chess, what they're doing is carefully responding to each other's actions, making decisions in the moment about what they should do next. But you wouldn't ever say that they're improvising. You know, even though it fits all the criteria of what improvisation is, you would never say, yeah, I went to see a great improvised chess game the other day. And so I think the problem with improvisation is, in actual fact, we need about 1,000 different words for what improvisation is, and we only have one. And I think that's because culturally we're from a kind of worldview that places emphasis on planned, determinate action, and everything that is surprising or unpredictable is seen as somehow coming from somewhere else. You know, it's like everything that is unexpected is a mistake. You know, musicians always talk about mistakes are really important to how they make music, but actually most of the time they're not mistakes, they're just things that are unexpected. And because of this worldview that places emphasis on planned, determinate action that starts off with the thought in the mind, anything that doesn't follow that trajectory, that comes from somewhere else, is considered to be a mistake. And I think the reason we only have one word for improvisation is because that's the world we're from, you know, where there's only this one kind of thing that sits outside the whole complex universe of words we have for like planned action.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think you could call it improvised, but it would be like a very specific little bit within that. Actually, there's an artist I'm sure you know very well, Yasuneo Tone, who is a Japanese sound artist associated with Fluxus, and we're very good friends, and I've known him for quite a long time, and I spent a long time trying to understand what it was he was doing when he was doing it, and he really rejected this idea that what he was doing was improvisation. And actually the closest that I came to understanding what he did was that it was just a kind of procedural action, that it was his famous piece of work is the CD skipping piece, where he has this, it's called Solo for Wounded CD, and when he's on stage he basically hits the CD player and makes it skip. And I think that the kind of description that he's most comfortable with is the one that just places emphasis on his activity as merely procedural. You know, he's just doing a bunch of things with no real desire to be expressive or have some kind of in the moment sort of transcendental oceanic boundary loss kind of thing.
It is interesting though, this idea that you brought up of sort of like things that are unexpected being thought of as mistakes or not mistakes, but sort of this binary approach of things. Like it's like, well, if you expect it, it's right, and if it's unexpected, it's wrong, and sort of existing as a black and white in that. But you, I mean, this is something that I really learned from you, and sort of, you know, things that you've either written or we've spoken about, is sort of this relationship to expectation of sort of like not only as a performer, but also as sort of an audience member, thinking that like, okay, I'm going to go to a show of music and be, and then fill in the blank. I'm going to be, you know, entertained. I'm going to be challenged. I'm going to be whatever, but sort of this idea of expectation. And there's a quote of yours that is both very funny and also something that I've thought about very, very frequently. It was from sort of an interview you did in 2007, which maybe we can sort of throw up here, which basically says, you know, the interviewer is asking you, what will people feel when they come to see your music? And you answer disappointed. And it, again, that is very funny, but it is sort of a thing that I think about a lot is like, well, when I go to hear a concert, when I go to hear Mark Fell's music, especially, I don't walk in with an expectation of enjoying it. Enjoying it or not enjoying it is not even sort of a parameter that I can apply to it. And I definitely had applied that before meeting you and before hearing your work, that I sort of was going to be like, okay, this is good, this is bad, this is something I enjoy, this is something I not enjoy, but it exists maybe on a different plane than that. Is that sort of the idea that it's not about yes or no, it's about something else?
Yeah, but the thing is, that interview was from a very long time ago, and you remember I was just saying that when I first started out, I didn't really understand what it was to be a performer or be on a stage, and nothing seemed to fit. And I remember feeling that way, and like like the audience was this weird thing that I didn't really understand. But actually, I've been performing now for like a long time, you know, over 20 years, constantly. And to be honest, my position's changed. That it's really important. It's really, really important that the audience, for me now, that the audience actually do enjoy being in the show. So maybe I've gone. Yes, you know, it's a matter of respect that they've come out to see you do what you're doing, and I'm not on stage for me. You know, I'm presenting something to them, and it might not be that I'm doing some kind of super easy listening thing or whatever, but it's important to me that they get something from it, you know, that it isn't just this kind of vacuous thing of well, that meant nothing, you know. So it's not about doing all the kind of really simplistic knee-jerk stuff that a musician can do. You know, if you're a house DJ, you can make the breaks and the drum rolls and all this kind of thing. It's not about that level of kind of enjoyment and expectation. But nonetheless, I do feel like when I'm planning a piece of work these days, I'm constantly trying to imagine what is it that the audience are going to do, what are they going to feel at this moment, not in terms of like an emotional feeling, but like I guess like it is about like managing expectations about boredom and stuff. Like I kind of like a certain kind of boredom, I guess. Do you know what I mean? Like
absolutely, yeah.
And just enabling people to get through that threshold into a state where they're not expecting all these things all the time. You know, it can be, things can kind of exist for more of a duration, and yeah, just giving people the space to kind of get into that, I guess. But yeah, like I said, my attitude has completely changed through performing a lot. That it's for me, it's all about what I'm kind of bringing to the audience, I guess, which is kind of a bit weird, I guess.
And then sort of to bring all these threads together, I think it sort of brings us to the piece that you wrote for Yarn Wire, which is called Core Self Oscillation. Just sort of these relationships between performers and composer and audience, and sort of for me, a lot of the piece, the sort of trance-like sort of elements that exist in the piece, not in like a trance, like a electronic music style, but more in sort of like a hypnotic type of dissociative sort of feeling. Can you talk a little bit about sort of the idea behind this piece and sort of how it relates to some of these things?
Well, I think actually working with Yarnwire was the first time I worked with I'd ever been commissioned to make a piece. You know, it was like this was my chance to kind of work with performers who had a kind of skill set that was way beyond whatever I could do. But the problem was that because I don't read or write music, it's like how do I construct this? And because I mean, these days I've worked a lot more. It's only been 5 years, but I've been lucky enough to do a lot more work like this with performers and ensembles. And so I've kind of developed a sort of confidence about how you might approach that. But yeah, it was like, I really didn't know what I was going to do or how I was going to do it. And so I kind of just made a whole bunch of rhythmic experiments that I wanted, that were kind of like, I guess, a sort of score that had to be copied. But then obviously when humans copy something like that, it's not just a copy, you know, it kind of brings something else into it. So it was like listening to what was happening in response to these kind of rhythmic things that I'd made, and and I guess just focusing in on a few things that seemed to work. But other than that, there was no kind of real idea. Like again, like the piano, I have no idea about. I understand that if you press this note, it's lower, and this note is higher. But in terms of how all those things work together, it's like a complete mystery to me. So it was. I think I had some kind of idea where it was like, can you start with 10 fingers, and then move to 9 and 8, and then the other person starts with 1 and gradually gets more complicated. And it was really that kind of basic, I think. It ended up working well.
Yeah, it's a super
But I
lovely
guess
piece.
through my stupidity, it was kind of like it proved to be quite unusual, I guess.
I mean, from our position too, it was like it was a challenge to work like that. I remember working with Ian, and you sent us a lot of files, a lot of sound files, and they were, each and every one was like so awesome. And you're like, here's some material, and I was like, oh man, how are we gonna do this? This is impossible. and Ian and I would try, and then we didn't really know how it would fit together, but it was, I think the process, at least for me, was like amazing once you came. It's like the process of making music is actually really comes alive when you're with people. And then when you were there, we kind of showed you, if I'm remembering correctly, like what we had kind of come up with. And then together we decided, which ones worked better, and you kind of gave us directions on different kind of pulses and flows and stuff like that. And it ceased being anything really related to what you sent us, except that was like the inspiration and kind of got us thinking on in that kind of musical world or something like that. And then we managed to make that an acoustic version, because I think what you gave us, it was impossible to do, but we took it as the inspiration and a starting point, which is cool.
I think
It sounded good as well.
So I think we actually have a question from one of our viewers. So that's going to come up here. So Tristan says, I very much agree with the circular idea of ideas. Okay. And experimentation. Maybe ideas and experiments are fundamentally opposing forces, and that the creative process is the imbalance between them. I guess the answer would be a yes or no.
So I'm trying to think about what to say about that. Like, for me, I guess I tend to think of, I mean, I'm aware that I have ideas, I'll be like watching TV one evening and think, oh my God, this is a good idea. And it seems to come from it starts off in my head. But for me, my experience is that ideas are always starting points and never conclusions. And that when you simply take an idea and you manage to kind of make it exactly the way it's imagined, it's never as good as if something happens in that process of making to kind of transform the idea. So, I mean, also I think like most activities, lots of activities, experimental. I think human beings, one of the greatest qualities about human beings is that we have this thing called curiosity, that we're constantly asking questions and wanting to find things out. And, I think that's something that people do all the time, not just people in studios or whatever, galleries and things. I think, people are constantly experimenting. So whether there's this idea of opposition between, so the idea, if there's an opposition between ideas as one thing and experimentation as the other thing, then ideas would be like kind of fixed or determinate positions, and experimentation is more of a process that would be about not necessarily adopting those positions. So I guess in that case there might be some kind of I can't remember what the question was, but it was something like Is there a distinction between these two things?
I think we did bounce back and forth between, like if the recording was your initial idea, I guess, and it was just by nature of its own medium a kind of fixed in place idea. Then when we finally worked, or when Russell and I attempted to realize those rhythmic patterns, maybe that was the kind of like experimentation with the idea, and then there was this kind of like fruitful back and forth between getting to a fixed place and then kind of examining it from all sides and then shifting that again. I don't know.
Yeah.
Or maybe like an analogy that I'm thinking about is sort of having, sort of two fixed points and like something like a string, an imaginary string connecting these fixed points. And it's not about either of the points, but it's sort of the tension or lack of tension in between those points that sort of like, either pulls it taut or loosens it and sort of changes its shape.
Let me show you something that I made the other day. 1 second. You'll be really interested in this. So my mum has late stage dementia, so she's kind of losing track of who she is. But she's really into music. If you play Nat King Cole, it's like she's astrally projecting or something. It's mental. She's completely, lost in the experience of music. And she started this summer through lockdown. She started to talk about how her mum was a pianist. I didn't know this, but her mum was a pianist in Leeds. And my mum said, she wishes she'd learned the piano. Obviously, that's not going to happen now. So I bought her a piano like a few months ago. So we got a piano in the house, and I could tell she grew up in a house with a piano in, because she can't play piano, but the way she just knows how to press it and stuff, you can tell she grew up in with one. And I was like, how can I make a kind of compositional thing for someone with late stage dementia to perform? I want to write a composition for someone with severe dementia. And I was like, oh my God, I'm really stuck. And I noticed she played, do you know this, what is it? Dominoes. She played dominoes. And I was like, Mum, can you explain the rules of dominoes to me? Because I've forgotten, just to see what would happen if we followed my mum's rules of dominoes. And she started to make these really weird structures out of dominoes. And suddenly I thought, this is like, somehow I have to think of how this dominoes thing can integrate with a compositional system that my mum can use to make music. So actually, after a lot of messing around, I came up with these things, which are bits of wood and felt.
Oh,
and
cool.
Basically, she can just pick them up and just go like this.
Oh, wow.
To press keys. And each one has got several options. So you can have that or that or that or that.
That's amazing.
So it's like a set of... So what I realized was, then I thought, what are the rules around how this is used? And then I thought, hang on a minute, I don't need any rules. This is the composition. There are no rules. It's just a physical thing. It's an example of a kind of physically embedded compositional system.
That's incredible.
And it's really nice. And actually, it's a bit disappointing because she'll just do it for 30 seconds, then forget what she's doing. I was like, wow, I just want to record like half an hour of my mum just doing this.
Oh, yeah.
But when I did it, there's always me going like, don't forget to do some more, Mum. But then I thought, if this can constitute a composition, if this block of things is a composition without any kind of written rules or anything, then actually the max patch that I make, for me, I'm not going to think of it as a tool anymore. The max patch is the composition, the interface and what it does is the composition. So for me, that kind of broke down the barrier between this, this question that we always get asked is like, what's the technology? Where is the technology and where's the work? And what's the dividing line between the two? And actually, through this process of making these things, I got to the point of realizing, for me, the tool and the composition are the same thing. And that was actually kind of a bit of it was a moment for me, where it's like, actually, I've kind of, it feels right, So, I mean, it's weird for me to even use the word composition because I didn't even know what it meant until about 5 years ago. Anyway, But these are really nice, don't you think?
They're
They're
amazing.
awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks for sharing that with us.
I'm really interested in
Sorry,
hearing
I'm
what they sound
totally
like.
like going off on a tangent. It's meant
No,
to be
no.
about
This is what you should do.
This is what we do here at Feedback, is we tangent. There is one thing that we should do while we have all of us here, and I think we should probably listen to a little bit of the piece that you wrote, just to sort of give everyone, because all of us know what the piece sounds like, and people listening at home might not quite understand. So we have a little video from the premiere of the piece. This work is in 5 movements, and I believe this is somewhere right around the second movement. It's about a minute and a half or so. Let's take a listen. Cool. While we still have that in our brain, I want to play a little bit of a sample of sort of one of the sort of test examples that Mark kind of put together. So this is kind of the generative process of sort of Mark creating music on his own and then trying to sort of hone in on sort of the finality of the piece. This doesn't necessarily correspond one-to-one, but just kind of gives everyone an idea of what type of material Yarn Wire was receiving to sort of give them an idea of how things were going to go. So let's take a listen to that. It's very short.
Man, we really had to slow it down, huh?
I think that was
were
one
terrible.
Of the faster ones.
Yeah,
no, there was some that were slow.
But I like that one because the sort of the rhythmic interplay there. I could really hear sort of like the idea of it sort of going back and forth between like two different people in sort of this robotically human kind of way.
It's a tough place to get to. Jeez.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean, is that like a place that you get to through rehearsal or through sort of just like a meditative state?
Who are you asking?
Ask Ian, since Ian brought it up.
No, I just think the human, or I mean, I should say my own tendency is to square everything off, to turn it into like a more familiar rhythm. And it's hard not to make that happen. I have no answer for how to do it. because
I mean, I guess one way of doing it would be to actually write it as a linear score with the correct kind of notation. And I guess if that was done, then you guys would be able to see ahead, you know, oh yeah, now we do these faster ones. But actually, it's kind of like, for me, that sort of ruins it, if you see what I mean. Like these days, if I was doing this piece, I think what I'd do would be, rather than try and construct something that's got a kind of linear progression of like, goes, you know, it starts like this and then do this, is actually just to give you a set of kind of sequences and things that you can just freely call on, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
So it's not about this is the order and this is how long it is. You know, it could actually be any length. But I think the way of performing it is that you just draw on these kind of templates, sort of, and then work. I mean, actually, really like Indian classical music, I guess.
It is kind of like where we ended up, at least structuring it. Kind of, you know, it's like we had these scenes. I guess we call them movements, just because that's like what you do. And you know, we in each movement we had like a process, I think, that we each went through, and there was no set beginning or end, as I recall. We just kind of like exhausted that process internally, I feel like. And because like when I hear that example that we just played, the one that you sent us, I remember like listening to that and just trying to find like, what's the pattern? How can I, because that's what the human brain is like wired to do, right? Is to find the pattern with it. And then all of a sudden, because it's like whatever Max MSP is doing, spitting out some other like thing, like it changes it, and then your brain just goes haywire. And so that was a really fascinating process to understand that like it was a process maybe that was machine made, that was familiar but always changing and twisting upon itself. And I think our solution was to find similar processes and like see what happened to those too. So that was kind of I don't think we'd ever done anything like that, which was pretty cool.
And I have a question actually specifically for Ning, which is, you know, sort of when you think about the percussionists and they're doing sort of this faster material, right? You can sort of maybe understand how they're conceptualizing like a framework of which this is existing, because there's a lot of things to work with. But in the piano parts in this, you know, it's quite elongated in what you're doing, right? If you're going from 10 fingers to 1 finger or 1 finger to 10 or whatever the process might be, it's, you know, maybe over the course of several minutes, and it's not quite as flashy. Like, what are you thinking about while you're just sort of there, as sort of this very slow thing happening against this very fast thing?
Well, first of all, we never listen to them, so I don't know what they're doing.
Doesn't matter the piece we're playing.
Just kidding. But you know, what they're doing is, I guess if you can think of this way, it's like we are almost like at the skin of the piece, and then there's sort of the various pulses of the body and the various blood flow that perpetuates through the piece, and then we're sort of just having this glow of skin over that sort of I guess the length of what Laura and I play. And I think that stark contrast is really beautiful. And I was just listening to that part as we were listening to this. The piano just really glows. I think what we're really, you know, Laura can chime in, is that really listening to the decay of the sound, because we were decaying differently depending, because we were shifting, right? If I had 1 finger, Laura had 9 fingers at the time, or vice versa. And then I think that the various decay of the piano really just sends this sort of balance, and it glows differently. It's like those lights that shifts up and down. So I thought the piano part was just really beautiful. Again, I have no idea what Russell and Ian are doing.
Yeah, I think there is like very little coordination between us, other than like, you know, when one sort of section of the piece ends and when we go to the next one. And yeah, But I love, Ning, I love your description of the like sort of body, you know, that's great.
Yeah, it's very
But for me, it really recalls New York house music, and that might be quite a stretch of the imagination, but the music that really made a lot of sense for me. So I kind of went through this whole synth pop and industrial music and stuff, and then house and techno arrived in Britain, like I guess like 87, 88 is when everyone started to get into it, and around 1990. I mean, it's weird because I'm from Britain. I don't have any direct experience of what is happening in New York other than what records are being produced and stuff. And about 1990, I kind of realized, there's a thing called New York house. There's deep house, and there are these producers making this kind of sound. And it was stuff that was kind of very carefully interlocking rhythmic elements with just a beautiful chord on top. And when I kind of realized that was a thing, and there was a whole bunch of producers predominantly in North America making that kind of music, that was the thing, and still is the thing, that it's like I really get, it's like I can listen to lots and lots of kinds of music, but if you play me some New York house music from 1990, 91, it will be like, that probably is the thing that I like the most, And structurally, what we did is not actually that far from that, I think. These kind of interlocking rhythmic things with a nice glidey chord. And actually, most of my music is like that, I think. It sort of follows that template.
Yeah. I just want to say that if there's one thing that I remember very clearly about you coming to our studio to work with us, especially on the piano part with Laura and I remember you said, I don't know what you guys do on the piano, but I just know some of those chords, I can just listen to them for hours. I just think they're so beautiful.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the thing about a piano. It just, you can't argue with it, can you? Really, it just sounds good. It's like centuries of engineering. But yeah, and I think that's what is nice in this piece is we gave the piano space to do what it does, I think, and just the kind of behavior of those sounds in the acoustic space, and just letting the audience hear it as it just makes that sound. It's nice. I have a funny experience. Do you know this piece by Terry Temlitz called something like The Meditation on the Death of the Album and Slave Labor or something? And it's a 39-hour piano piece, and basically all it is and he played it from beginning to end in several sessions, and all it is he just puts, to play it, you just put this bit of your hand on some keys until it stops making sound, and then you move up and do it and back down again. So this bit might last 5 or 6 seconds. Brutal. And he got asked to perform it in where is it, Martin Gropiusbau in Berlin, in the big hall, a very reverberant hall. So they got a really beautiful piano. I think it was like a Fazioli or something. And he invited loads of people to do a 4-hour slot. And he asked me to do a 4-hour slot of like, so I have to sit in front of this piano for 4 hours and do this thing. And I'm used to performing, I don't get nervous about that now. And I sat there and did 2, and then started to get really scared. And I'm thinking, so I'm looking really calm, but in my head, I'm having a meltdown. I'm like, I cannot physically sit here for 4 hours and do this. What am I going to do? I was like, Mark, just get in the zone. And then I realized every time I did this, I earned €1. And so I thought, wow, this is amazing. And I just sat there, just thinking, like a slot machine, like, and it got me through. And actually, after half an hour, I kind of got into it and realized I was actually enjoying doing it and stuff. But obviously, Terry really loved that kind of story. That it was just ended up being about the ka-ching of the euro. Coming out.
That's the economics of performance, man. It's per note. It's per
I'm
note.
gonna try that next time I get nervous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you should listen to that piece. It's a really great
No,
piece.
yeah,
actually.
definitely.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with
Yeah.
it. I wanna maybe not all 39 hours, but who knows?
Mm.
I don't want to keep everyone too long over sort of our time limit. I do have one last question, which sort of both goes to Yarnwire and sort of Mark in separate parts. And it is one of the things that I really wanted to sort of talk about is how the sounds were chosen for this piece in terms of like the actual acoustic sounds. And the reason I have this question, Mark, is specifically, I know that when you were younger, you've told me this, or I've heard you say this in conversation, that you were extremely, extremely particular about the types of sounds you would use. Like there'd be maybe a particular, drum sound, digital drum sound, electronic drum sound that you were like, would fine tune again and again to get it to be exactly this very precise thing that you wanted. And then, this piece sort of has, sort of a, does this piece have sort of a wider range of interpretive possibilities for sort of the drum sounds, or does it fit very narrowly in sort of what you wanted it to be?
Well, in the Yarnwire studio, there's lots and lots of different drums, and I guess somehow we focused on using a certain set of those. I mean, I can't remember. There are some kind of quite loud metallic kind of things, aren't there, as well?
Mm-hmm.
I think that they might have also been inspired by the pre-recordings, if I remember.
Yeah, in the audio, I remember there were some like metallic ones and some drummy ones, and I think we were just trying to find sounds that were as close as we could to those. But then there were movements like the gong movement. Ian, how did that just kind of happened? I think when you heard the things and we tried some new stuff or something.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't really have any preconceptions about what sounds we might use or not. One thing I've noticed about drum sounds is I tend to not like snare drum sounds for some reason.
You're not the first person to have said that.
What, sorry?
You're not the first person in this series to have said that,
Really?
actually. I feel like Anne said something like that.
Yeah, I don't know why that is. But
It has such a militaristic sort of immediate association, maybe. I don't know.
yeah, or maybe also like rock music or something.
Yeah.
Or there's something kind of quite, I don't know. Just the sonology of it is it's quite, not very smooth, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas, like what are they called? Frame drums, the drums that you're using.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yep.
There's a kind of fluffiness to that sound, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Like it obviously has a kind of resonant area where the frequency content is,
Yep.
where the acoustic energy is. But there's a sort of like, do you know what I mean about a fluffiness to and maybe it's just the kind of feel of the hand on the skin or something.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It has a lot of
And
like
that kind of combination of those two elements of the sound is, the kind of roundness of the resonance and the sort of fluffiness is. I like sounds that have got that kind of composite feel, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what were you going to say, Ian?
Sorry,
it just has like a resonant aura about it. It's like a less focused sound than like a snare drum, which is just tightly bunched.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we could just keep going, but we should probably draw.
You can do if you want. I've got work to do after this, so I'm desperate to avoid that.
That we can the after party.
We should have some like secret after links that people could check out.
It's for all the Patreon subscribers. The
That's
extra
right.
content.
Well, that is all the time we have today. So thanks so much, Mark, for joining us, and thanks Argeo for leading this conversation. It's really nice to see you both. again after so long. Our next episode is going to air this Thursday, October 22nd, for a talk with Sam Pluta and George Lewis about Sam's 2 pieces that he wrote for us, one of which actually happened on the same premiere event as Mark's piece. So that'll be nice to have that continuity. Remember to subscribe to our channel on YouTube and check out patreon.com, which is a way to support this series and what we're doing this season. There's lots of added features, some playlists, and all sorts of things that come along with subscription. Thanks again, and thanks everyone for being here.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks.